All right, good morning. This is the February 6th, 2026 meeting. February 7th, see, 2026 meeting in consideration of a warrant special meeting for the select board. So kick us off. We'll still do public comment. Any public comment?
Seeing any
Okay.
in the room.
Okay, awesome. All right, so then we'll move on to our any additions, deletions, modifications.
Nope.
Awesome. Move on to consideration of approval of a warrant, which includes one invoice for parts and to repair the elevator in Richmond Free Library. Any tee up that you want to give to us, Josh?
Yeah, I think the elevator stopped working earlier this week. Suzanne, library director, called the elevator repair company. They diagnosed it and said, well, and this is fairly typical of the elevator repair company, they're not going to move a finger until they have a check for the parts. They wouldn't even schedule the work to be done. So thank you guys for being here for an emergency meeting to get approval for its $3,946.08 for the part. As soon as they get that scheduled, the elevator repair company will come and do the repair. We are getting up on tax season where they've got some of the AARP tax seminars, so the elevator's pretty important to get folks up and down to the room for the taxes.
Any estimate on the potential total labor on that? I know the hourly rate is egregious, but
It is. Yeah, all they said on the invoice was 1 to 2 days, so hopefully that's closer to the 1 day. And unfortunately, we're
at $425 an hour.
Yeah, and I mean, we've really got one vendor on this. We used to be with Otis Elevator over there. They were challenging to work with, and we switched to, what is this, Atlas Elevator, I think.
Do we have a standing maintenance contract with an elevator company, or are we doing it ad hoc?
No, we do with this company. So they come in and do I think it's like every 3 months, they do an inspection and a cleaning and whatever they need to do for that. But this seems to be outside of that.
Do they do both buildings?
No, we're still with Otis over here. We've got a longer contract. We need to see if we can break it. I know that they ended up getting out of the Otis contract. They weren't happy with it. So they started going with Alpha. They were a little more happy. So we have two different contractors at this
Thank
point.
you.
Yeah.
Do we know what the part is?
On the invoice, it talks about failed packings, check valves, and replacing some corrupt software. So it seems like it's
I got nothing.
It's an elevator.
there's the computer that goes with it too.
It's the thing that goes
the
up and
button?
down.
That's what they said.
Yeah, the software seems like something that would fall under their regular maintenance.
Yeah.
To update it.
I'd be curious to know the history of the hydraulic components that failed when they were replaced, if this was something that could have been prevented with preventative maintenance or possibly a warranty.
Well, in any case, we have a pressing problem in front of us, right?
Yeah, but we can do some follow-up questions though about
Yeah.
preventative maintenance and what could we do to prevent it.
Yeah, well, I'd at least like to know what the maintenance contract covers, bearings and packings and stuff like that are wear parts.
Yeah.
And you would expect them to go over time. And you can't always predict when, but so do you need a motion to
Yeah, just motion to approve the warrant.
Motion to approve the warrant.
seconded?
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Bart.
Hi, David.
Hi, Greg.
Aye, Caitlin. All right, and then do we need to adjourn this meeting, Josh?
Yeah, we'll adjourn this and we'll start the next one in 10 minutes.
Motion to adjourn, this Bart?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Bart, aye.
Greg, aye.
David, I.
Caitlin, aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna end this Zoom. We have a different Zoom for the other meeting, so anybody
Okay.
who's budget meeting, go back to the website and log back in.
See you in a minute.
See you in a little bit.
All right, welcome to the Saturday, February 7th, 2026 meeting of the special select board meeting for the informational session on the budget. Let's get started with any public comment. Nothing in the room?
Nope.
All right. All right, agenda item number 2 here today is the Australian ballot information hearing. So review and discuss Article 6. Who wants to tee this up, Josh, or?
Yeah, sure. I have my presentation ready to go. So just first little table setting. This is the first of 2 public informational hearings that we'll do for Australian ballot items prior to town meeting, which will be held on March 3rd. Our second meeting is going to be on Monday, February 23rd at 7 p.m. Also here in the town center and via Zoom. This morning we'll go over the budget for item A. Then we'll discuss the town plan, the conservation reserve funding article that's on the agenda or on the warning. Also, the Town Center Reserve Fund funding article, followed by a quick review of charitable appropriations. All of these are the Australian ballot items for town meeting. Before we get into the budget, I want to thank the town department heads and Connie for helping to put together the agenda or the budget. We really start doing this in September. We hold 3 meetings for the select board in October, November, and December, a meeting each. And thank you to the board for those additional meetings and review and work on the budget over the last several months. Also, thanks to all the public. We had a lot of public feedback, as we always do in the budgeting process. And it's helpful to hear that from the public over the time that we're working on the budget, so that when we get to here, hopefully by the time we get here, we've got a budget that we've had a good amount of feedback on, the board's happy with, and most of the public had a chance to weigh in. This year is our second year now in a row voting the budget on Australian ballot. It used to be voted in person at town meeting where there was a chance to make amendments and change the budget if you like to from the floor. Now it goes to Australian ballot. So we did have a meeting back in January to have sort of a final presentation before we made any final changes to the budget. So one final chance for voters to have some say on the budget. Today's meeting, there's no chance to make any amendments to the budget. The warning is already printed and ready for town meeting. But this is a way to present the budget and answer some questions. So anybody who has questions, please feel free to chime in after the presentation. I do want to note on the website, just to give people a little bit of an idea of where to find some information. I'm going to share my screen for a minute. So if you go to the homepage of the website, there's 2 spots to find information on town meeting and on the budget. The first is if you go to departments and you go to town clerk. Under town clerk, there's a heading annual town meeting, March 3rd, 2026. If you click into this, we've got the official warning. We've got links to both of the informational meetings. We've got links to the budget materials, which are also included in the packet for the meeting. As we scroll down, we have the links to all the charitable appropriation requests that are being voted by Australian ballot as well. So you can click on Article 11 and bring up the request. This one here happens to be for Age Well. So that's here for the public to review prior to town meeting, should anybody be interested. The other way to get to this is in the news posts. So if you scroll down to the news posts, we have a news post for annual town meeting, and that's also easily accessible from the homepage. So once we get done with this recording of this meeting, we'll also put the recording on these pages so that if anybody wants to have a chance to go back and listen to the recording, they're certainly welcome to. Looking at this, we have a fairly light turnout this morning, but I'm sure there's many more people that are interested in the information. They just didn't have time on a snowy Saturday morning, but we'll make sure we post this for the future. So without further ado, we'll jump into a presentation on the budget. Okay, so as we go along here, I do have several pages to share. I've numbered each page. So if you have a question about any specific page, please just note down that number on a piece of paper and we can easily scroll back to any questions that anybody might have. So in this budget, we will start by going over municipal operations. They'll have a review of reserved and unassigned funds, followed by the use of both reserve or unassigned and restricted funds, an overview of the FY27 budget, a review by department, a review of the conservation reserve fund article, and review of the social services article. We also have a review of the town center article, which I failed to add to the agenda because that was a new update since the last time we did this presentation. But we'll talk about those too. Even though we'll talk about those a little bit later in the meeting, we're talking about them in relation to the budget because it will affect the tax rate if those pass. So first, I'd like to start out just sort of build from the ground up, just to make sure everybody's familiar with fiscal years. So the previous fiscal year was FY25 that ran from July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. Currently, we're right in the middle of fiscal year 26, which began this past July 1st, 2025, and will end later this year, June 30th, 2026. The budget that's being discussed today is the FY27 budget, which will begin on July 1st of this year and end on June 30th of next year. We'll start out with a review of the municipal operations. So we'll start with the clerk, administration, and finance. We've got a town manager, finance director, deputy town manager, town clerk, assistant town clerk, all working in the administrative office. We all work very closely together to manage revenue, payments, payroll, policies, and projects. Planning and zoning, it's also in the town center, which has a director of planning and zoning and a zoning administrator. So they're responsible for all zoning permits and requests that come in, helping with the development review board, as well as working on the town plan and updates to the zoning regulations and working with the planning commission. The police is currently budgeted for a half chief, 4 full-time officers, and 1 part-time administrative assistant. That office is also here in the town center. This budget is a little bit different as far as the configuration. The budget that we're in right now for FY26, we were planning on sharing a chief with Heinsberg. That agreement ended in, I think, September of this past year, but that's still the budget that we're currently in for FY26. The Richmond Library has a full-time director and also an assistant director with 6 employees, 6 part-time employees and a part-time substitute employee. The structure of the library is that they're actually governed by the Board of Trustees, not by the Selectboard. The Board of Trustees works with the library director to prepare the budget. That's then presented to the Selectboard for inclusion in the budget that'll be voted on at town meeting. The fire department has 1 chief, 1 assistant chief, 3 captains, a lieutenant, and 14 firefighters. We might actually be a few more firefighters now, I think. We're starting to grow a little bit, which is good. It's an all-volunteer department. They do get paid for hours worked responding to calls and doing trainings. And if anybody's interested in joining the fire department, there's some links on our website that you can check out and meet with the captain or meet with the chief and learn about joining the department. They can always use some additional help. The highway department consists of a foreman, an assistant foreman, and 4 full-time drivers and operators. In the winter, especially in winters like this, and on mornings like today, they're very busy plowing the roads, salting and sanding, and preparing for summer work. They're also, I think, right now painting part of their office right now to kind of spruce it up and get it into a little bit better shape. In the summer, they do a ton of work, gravel road maintenance, paving plan, drainage work. This past summer, you probably saw them on East Main Street doing some sidewalk installation. We have a very capable highway department that's able to take on larger projects that other towns might have to sub out to contractors. They do a lot of great work in the summertime. I do want to touch on the Water Resources Department. That budget is voted on separately by the Water and Sewer Commission in the spring, usually at their annual meeting, which is held either in May or June. It is not part of the budget that's being voted on at town meeting. It is governed by the Water and Sewer Commission, serves about 500 accounts located in the village of Richmond. And again, the water and wastewater budgets are not part of what we're voting on. If anybody has interest in the water and wastewater budgets, we'll start to talk about those probably late February, early March as we get towards that annual meeting. And the commission usually takes 3 or 4 meetings to walk through and make some changes to the budget. And before the commission finalizes it at their meeting in May or June. And that one is voted on just by the commissioners. It is not open to the public for a vote. So now we'll transition to start to talk about reserve funds and unassigned and restricted funds. So these are 2 sources of money. Reserve funds function like savings accounts. They're typically used for larger capital purchases or projects. They're usually planned out. So we've got a highway reserve fund. We know we have to buy a truck, say in 2 years, you start to put some money away to help pay for that truck. So each reserve fund usually is in the capital plan, has very specific uses, and it has a lot of thought put into what goes into it and what comes out of it for what purchases. Unassigned and restricted funds are basically a combination of underspending and revenue in excess of budgeted revenue. So for instance, police department lately, we've been understaffed in the police department. but still budgeting for a full department. So that money doesn't just go away. At the end of the fiscal year, the auditors look at that and say, well, you've got this much more money in police that you didn't spend. So that goes into the unassigned funds, and that is reported in the audit and used during the budgeting process by the select board to put back in towards the next budget. We also use some of that money if we have unexpected emergencies like recovery from flooding. It's good to have some money on hand. The only difference between restricted funds and unassigned funds is that it used to be directed by statute that highway money had to stay with highway. So that was called restricted because it was restricted for highway use. Again, it's the same idea. It's an overage and highway would go into that restricted fund. And then unassigned funds can be used for anything else. They were raised for any other department, and they can be used for any department, including highway. The statute did change a couple of years ago, so now you can use money raised for the highway for other departments, but we've chosen to still separate those out, knowing that when we do have a disaster, frequently it's very highway heavy in those the funds needed to repair the infrastructure. So we have kept them separate. If we got into a pinch, we could use restricted funds elsewhere, though, because statute does allow for it. We'll have a bit more on these as we progress further. So we're going to start by diving into reserve funding. As I mentioned, they function like savings accounts. They can be added to yearly from tax revenue, and the amount is decided by the voters. Reserves can also be added with non-tax revenue. So the town center maintenance fund primarily is funded with rent payments from tenants in the town center, the largest one being the post office, which has about $100,000 in rent every year. The reappraisal fund is funded by the state's Act 60 reappraisal grant. We get that grant every year, and part of that goes in towards this fund to help us prepare for a reappraisal, which I think our last one was about $125,000, and you end up having to do one every 8 years or so, depending on how real estate prices keep up with your grant list. As I mentioned, reserves are used mostly for larger capital purchases. So you're looking for a fire truck, a building improvement, a plow truck. Actual use of reserve funds does fluctuate based on the capital plan and emergencies that fall outside of the scope of budget. Capital plan we use as a guide as we build the budget throughout the fall. We're going to be coming to the select board, I think, at our next meeting for approval of that capital plan, which is reviewed and approved by the select board every year. Here's a look at our reserve totals from 2012 to 2025. As you can see, have been increasing our reserves over the number of years here. One of the strategies that the board has pivoted to in the last couple of years is to try to do more with purchasing larger capital equipment outright with cash rather than taking loans. So that does contribute to an increase in the reserves as we're saving early for larger capital purchases in the future. And one of the benefits of that is it helps us save on interest. I think Connie had calculated about $1 million in interest over the last 10 years or so from the various bonds we had out there. So we've got 32 different reserve funds, and these, as you could, this chart is a little hard to see, but what it basically shows is even though we've got a large number of funds, there's about 8 of them that have the majority of the money in them. So the largest funds are Special Projects Reserve, Bridge and Culvert, Conservation, Town Center Maintenance, Fire Department, Records Restoration, and the Highway Reserve. Those also sort of correlate to the higher capital purchases. You can look at Highway and Fire Department. Those are pretty big departments with big expenditures. Bridge and culverts can be very expensive, and Special Project Reserve is essentially the ARPA money that the town received. The deadline to spend that was the end of last year. We transferred that money in to pay for wages, which was allowable expense from ARPA, and then created the Special Projects Reserve to put the almost $800,000 into, and that gives us a little bit more time to spend that money. And so now we're working on some projects like improvements to Volunteers Green and Browns Court that money will go towards. So planned reserve account usage. We have a total planned usage this year of $518,000 from the reserve. This is for fiscal year 27. In the police department, we will need to purchase a police cruiser, improve some of the radios, purchase some more dash cams, and some mobile data computers. In the fire department, we're looking to purchase a washing machine for the turnout gear, and the roof shingles on the main structure do need to be replaced. The fire safety equipment reserve, we keep some money in there to purchase turnout gear. This is helpful to replace aging gear as well as outfit new firefighters as they join the department. And the highway department will be purchasing a new dump truck and a new tractor loader in fiscal year 27. The library has actually already started some interior painting. They're going to be finishing that up in fiscal year 27. And they have some plans for reconfiguring the circulation desks. So as I mentioned, we've started the transition from taking out loans towards paying things outright with reserve money. If you looked at this slide, even 2 or 3 years ago, there was probably 8 or so items on there. As we've paid those off, it's dropped down to just the Jericho Road improvements, which was the final payment in 2032. And we had a stormwater project on Millage Street. The final payment for that is in 2032. So no large equipment on here, no more fire trucks or road highway trucks. Really, again, transitioning towards paying outright and not taking loans and incurring interest. So now we'll transition from the reserve funds to unassigned and restricted funds. So we went over this a little bit. They're a combination of underspending and unbudgeted revenue. Restricted funds are tied back to highway, and unassigned funds are from every other department. So the balance can increase in a few ways. Reimbursements from FEMA that are received for expenses that were incurred in the prior fiscal year. We're actually having that happen right now in FY26. In FY25, we had a lot of outflow of those funds to recover from the flooding. And right now we're getting reimbursed. FEMA always takes at least a year to get reimbursements. We're running up on a year and a half right now, even though as sort of as fast as it moves. So now we're going to sort of get more money in, so our unassigned funds will go back up. Also, if there's underspending on budgeted expenses, such as when a department has vacancy savings, again, the big one that we've had the last few years is the police department. And also sometimes we'll receive grants that will reduce budgeted spending. Balance can decrease when we have unbudgeted spending. Mostly that is for repairs from flooding in the last couple of years. But there's also things that come up sometimes that the select board would like to fund that we don't necessarily have a budget for it. But if there's a good project or a good program that we'd like to spend money on, if there's money in unassigned or restricted funds, we can sometimes fund it through that. So in November 23, the select board adopted a fund balance policy, which put a limit on unassigned and restricted funds of 15% of the budget. So there was been some concern of, well, how much should we keep on hand and how much is too much to have on hand? Through guidance from the auditors, they suggested keeping about 15% of the current budget. So as we look through this every fall to plan for the next year, we try to project how many unassigned funds we'll have at the end of that fiscal year. And then anything that is over 15% of the next year's budget, we try to put back into the budget to reduce the taxes. So that's basically what the auditor said. Keep 15%. It kind of keeps us a little bit of cash flow, especially to help get through a crisis like a big flood, where we don't have to take a loan to dig ourselves out of that. So unassigned restricted fund balance at the end of June 30th, 2025, the end of FY25, unassigned funds were just under $1 million, and restricted funds was actually in the red at $1.2 million. We had $2 million in flood expenses, so that's why that is a negative number. Obviously, that's never a goal to have a negative number. The combined total was $309,000, which is negative 6%. The way that the town was able to continue to have cash flow is that we had a good amount of money in reserve funds. So we still had money set aside for the special projects fund and for the bridge and culvert reserve, which we didn't spend anything on in FY26. We had no budgeted expenses. So we kept that money in those reserve accounts, which stayed in the bank account, which helped us stay liquid through the end of FY25. And now we're getting more money back from FEMA. So that's starting to rise up and balance out. Again, we had $2 million in flooding that contributed to the negative balance at the end of FY25. So you can see that we had been seeing a growing trend rising up to 2021 in reserve funds, started to come down a little bit in 23 and 24. And obviously we're below where we really want to be at the end of FY25. As a percentage of budget, again, we do try to shoot for that 15%. We've ended up right around 30 or so percent in reality at the end of the fiscal year. This year we dropped down again to negative 6.23%. Here's a look at historical use of unassigned and restricted funds to offset the tax rate. So going back to 2019, we've made a conscious effort to put money in to either pay for special projects, to offset the tax rate, or to go back into reserve funds. Some years we have a little bit more to use, some years we have less. So 23, 24, 25, we had a good amount of unassigned funds. So that money went right back into the budget. In FY26, that was when we were dealing with the flooding, or in preparation for FY26, we were dealing with the flooding. So we didn't have as many funds to put back into the budget because we knew we were already spending about $2 million in the budget year to go towards repairs. This year, though, anticipation of getting more money back from FEMA, there's $880,000 that we have put into the FY27 budget between tax offset and reserve funds. And we'll get into a little bit more detail here shortly. So the way we calculate this is a bit of a busy spreadsheet here, but up top, we start out with 309,000 to the negative. That's our balance at the end of FY25. The planned use of unassigned funds in FY26, we had 78,000. That was what you saw on the previous page. So we knew we were going to spend that. Unbudgeted expenses in FY26 of 188,000. That was primarily the pickleball court and a couple other projects that we hadn't budgeted. So we knew we had to make sure that we factored that in as money that was going to be going out that we hadn't budgeted for. So that was going to leave us a subtotal of about $250,000 of unbudgeted expenses and budgeted use of that money. Then we took a look at, well, what do we anticipate getting back in FY26? So we anticipate about almost $2 million coming back from FEMA for the flood expenses. We had a correction in use of opioid reserve fund of $5,000 that should have been used in 25. We will adjust that and make sure that that money gets reallocated to the general fund. Police vacancy savings in the first half of FY26 was about $250,000. Planning and zoning vacancy savings of about $40,000. We had some projected savings in the fire department of $25,000. We also got a local economic impact payment from the state. This was as a result of the flooding, some extra money that came to the towns that you could not use on anything that was flood related or was already paid for by FEMA. So a little extra money that we have that helps us go towards the general fund. And the financial department has some projected savings in FY26 of about $10,000. So we're looking at this thing, by the end of FY26, we'll have about $2.3 million coming back into that fund. So that leaves us with a projected FY26 end balance of about $1.7 million, which I'm down in this area here. We then allocated about $540,000 to reserve funds. And we did this where we looked at the next 5 years or so of anticipated expenses and how much money has to go to those reserve funds. And we tried to put money in to fund those for FY27, as well as to spread some of that out to reduce the taxpayer burden in future fiscal years to try to flatten out what we need to raise in taxes going forward. That left us with $1.2 million in unassigned and restricted funds as our projection at the end of FY26. 15% of the FY27 budget is $893,000. So there's that 15% that we look at. So once we subtract that from the 1.2 million, it leaves us with $340,000 to put towards the FY27 budget, and that directly reduces what we need to raise in taxes. So in FY27 budgeted contribution to reserve accounts, as I mentioned, we have $540,000 of unassigned and restricted funds that are going to be going towards reserve funds. We'll go through in detail exactly where those are going to be going here in a bit. So our total contribution is $1.2 million. The total raised from taxes will be $680,000, and the total from unassigned funds is $540,000. The planning and legal reserve will be funded with $10,000. We'll have a modest amount for the police canine reserve of $100. Police capital reserve will get $200,000, with half of that coming from unassigned funds, $15,000 for the library reserve. Fire safety equipment, $20,000, with all of that coming from unassigned funds. Fire capital reserve, $220,000, with $50,000 of that coming from unassigned funds. The recreation reserve fund will be funded with $10,000, with $10,000 coming from unassigned funds. That's a new reserve that the board created to go towards things like upkeep of the pickleball courts or upkeep of the playground. We've had a lot of recreational equipment out there that we don't have a fund to maintain that with. So this is a start on maintaining that, especially with the pickleball courts, which can be a little bit costly to maintain. Highway capital reserve, we're putting $250,000 from restricted funds to fund an overall contribution of $575,000. The Bridge and Culvert Reserve is slated for $160,000 with 110 coming from unassigned funds. The Guardrail Reserve will get $10,000. So now moving on to unassigned and restricted funds and how they're going to offset the tax rate. So we use $78,000 in the current fiscal year in FY26. We're budgeting $340,000 in FY27. That will leave us with a projected year-end balance of $893,000, which is 15% of the projected FY27 budgeted expenses. So now we'll talk a bit about the tax rate. The tax rate presented here and all the estimates are based on an FY27 grand list. That grand list is an estimate from our assessor that will be finalized right after April and set by the tax rate then will be set on that grand list by the select board in July of 2026 for FY27. So overall spending is up by almost $1 million, about 19.83%. A good amount of that is due to putting more money into the reserve funds. By section, the general fund is up $384,000, the highway fund is up $601,000, and we have about a 4% increase in the tax rate from FY26 to FY27. So the total amount is being raised by taxes increased by $178,000 or about 4% from FY26 to FY27. And although we have about $1 million more in spending, the $540,000 contributed to the reserve funds from unassigned and restricted funds and $340,000 used to offset the tax rate gives us about $880,000 that's non-tax money that helps go towards covering that increase in costs. So the municipal tax rate is projected to go up from FY26 to 27 by about 0.0217. And again, it's a 3.98% increase of the tax rate from FY26 to FY27. So what that means when you're looking at actual home value, so if you're looking at per $100,000, you had about $545 in the current fiscal year. That will go up by $22 in FY27 for a total bill of $567 per 100,000. So this chart gives you a little bit of something to look at as you figure out what your property value is, what you can expect for a municipal tax rate, not including the school. And speaking of the school, that is about 70% of your overall tax rate. So when you get your tax bill, that doesn't have just municipal operations on it. That also had the taxes that are being raised for the school. The town acts as a pass-through for that. So the town collects all of the school money and then sends that off to the school. It's not broken out on your tax bill, so it can get a little confusing to figure out which is which. But the school right now is projected for a 1.3812% tax rate, and the town is 0.5664. So if you look at your total tax bill, as we talked about, for $100,000, FY27, it would be up $567 for the municipal portion of it. And then $1,381 would be going towards the school. So of your for a total tax bill of $1,948 for every $100,000 in property value. So that just hopefully is a helpful chart to look at to understand how much is going back towards municipal operations and how much is going back towards the school. Our town budgets, as you can see, we've had sort of a gradual, an increase every year. Obviously, cost of living, cost of inflation continue to go up. We had a bit of a spike in 2023. I think that was how we classified use of the reserve funds. We started to pull those out of the budget. And this year we're going up a little bit more, again, because we have a lot going into reserve funds, but a lot of that's coming out of the unassigned and restricted funds. Looking at the allocations by department, highway, obviously very capital and labor intensive, so that's our largest department. Police with wages and equipment in police department, our next highest, followed by administration, then fire, planning and zoning, library, then planning and zoning. Then we have contracted social and health services, recreation, and assessors for a smaller amount. So now we'll take a look at the budget by department and talk about some of the changes across all departments as well as individual departments. So changes affecting multiple departments. Salaries reflect a step increase on the pay grid and the grid increasing by 3%. The actual increase of the grid will be set usually in May or June as we get towards the next fiscal year, as we look at the cost of living and the the index for Northern New England, or it's the New England index that we look at. And then that sort of helps us determine, helps the select board set the actual rate increase of the pay grade. We factored in a 5% increase in property casualty workers' comp and assigned risk and unemployment insurance for the town. Increase in total contributions to reserve in FY26, we had 375,000. This year, we're putting $1.2 million into reserves with 680,000 raised from taxes. We also have an increase in $305,000 in contributions raised from taxes to go back towards those reserves. Health insurance this year was not a huge factor. We've seen other years where it's been up around 10% increase. This year, the premium increase was only 1.08%. So happy to get a little bit of a breather from those increasing costs in fiscal year 27. So looking at administration, we are increasing the hours for the assistant town clerk from 12 to 25 per week to help keep up with an increasing workload. She will also be trained as a backup on payroll. Our finance director is going to be retiring this year, so we expect there's going to be a bit of a learning curve for the next finance director. And it's also good to have another person or two trained on payroll so that if the finance director is ever sick on a payroll day, we have somebody else that can jump in and help do that. We added $5,000 for the finance director as a per diem to help support a transition to a new finance director. Planning and zoning, a modest increase in transportation planning of $7,500 up to $10,000. We did cut back a bit on projects last year. We had a number of projects the previous few years. We anticipate probably a couple more in FY27. There's also a reduction in health insurance due to staffing changes in planning and zoning. The police department, the select board did make an increase in wages to the police department by 20% in the fall of 2025. That was informed by research from Interim Chief Cohen, looking at surrounding departments and where their contracts had gone with wages. Knowing that we've struggled recruiting police officers over the last number of years, the board would look at this as a way to try to make Richmond a bit more of an attractive department. I think it has worked. We've just hired 2 new officers. We had both of them sworn in yesterday. So we seem to be tracking in the right direction with hiring police officers. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we did have this year budget for half a chief and 4 officers. For this budget coming up in FY27, we budgeted for a full chief that would be a Richmond chief and 3.5 officers. Our real goal is 4 officers, but knowing that sometimes hiring can take some time and also needing to kind of balance this budget out, we budgeted for 3.5 officers, figuring that in reality, we might have, 3 to start off the year. We maybe won't get that 4th officer till about this time next year, just knowing that hiring sometimes, especially in the police department, can be a bit challenging. In the fire department, we increased salaries by $1 per hour to increase wages for firefighters. We also increased radio dispatch from $5,600 to about $9,000 in anticipation of a rate increase. We use Shelburne Dispatch for the fire department, and they've already made some signals that their costs aren't necessarily being covered, so they're going to have to raise some rates for all departments that are using them for dispatch. We do have good news in the fire department, a reduction of nearly $60,000 in debt payments from 2 loans that ended this fiscal year. In contracted social services, we have been making a contribution to the Williston Community Justice Center, which does a large number of things. Most importantly, it's sort of an alternative venue for people who are arrested that are for lesser charges. They can go through a restorative justice program with Williston Community Justice rather than going through the traditional court system. So we have been contributing to them about $15,840 because that wasn't fully funded by the grant funding. There's been a lot of changes structurally about how community justice centers are going to be funded in Chittenden County. We expect that some of their services are going to shrink a little bit, but they should have enough money to cover the pre-charge use that we have with them primarily, which is people that are arrested in Richmond for crimes that can go through the community justice center. So reducing that to 0 helps our budget, and they continue to work with their grant. In highway, we increased dues, certifications, and licenses to help pay for a CDL training for a newer staff member. That costs about $5,000. So we increased that to pay for that staff member to get a CDL. And and hopefully continue to retain good staff here in Richmond. Taking a look at revenue, net interest and general checking account, we level funded this at $5,000 for interest. And part of the plan here is that we're predicting about $35,000 to $45,000 in interest reinvested back into reserve funds. So as we looked at earlier, we have quite a bit of money in reserve funds. Some of that, we're not going to spend in FY27. So the plan is to buy some certificates of deposit with that money, get a higher return on that, take that money, then reinvest that directly into the reserve funds. So that way we'll have a little bit more money as we go into FY28 that we don't have to raise in taxes. So now the Conservation Reserve Fund, this item is voted by Australian Ballot each year. And the question on the ballot is to approve funding for the Conservation Reserve Fund by adding 1 cent to the municipal tax rate in fiscal year 27. So the estimated grand list value right now is about $8 million. So this would raise about $80,000. The actual amount raised will be based on the final grand list once it's finalized and the tax rate is set in July. So if this article passes, about $80,000 would be added to the budget and be added to the tax rate. So that would take the tax rate increase from 3.98% to 5.82%. So if the Conservation Reserve Fund question passes, it'll add about $10. We'll add $10 in taxes per year for each $100,000 in property value. So looking at this chart again, we start with our base at $545 per $100,000 in home value for this current fiscal year. The total raise would go up to $32, and total increase in the previous slide it was $22. This goes up to $32, and that gives a total bill of $577 per $100,000 in home value. So this is a look at, again, just municipal, not including school, if the conservation fund passes. This year, the select board opted to include a question about the town center reserve fund. It's basically a question of do the voters want to fund this the same way as the conservation reserve fund? So it would add 1 penny to the tax rate. So the numbers are all identical to the conservation reserve fund. This would raise probably about $80,000 to go into the town center reserve fund. We'll have more on this later in the meeting, but as I mentioned earlier, this is funded each year with rents from the tenants. So just over $100,000 in rents. This would add some more money to that. We also know that this building here, the town center, has a lot of future maintenance that needs to happen, a lot of future renovation. This is a way to start to fund that, knowing that we've got some larger bill items on the way. As many of you will recall, there was a bond vote for about $10 million last year for a lot of improvements to this building. That failed. If we could start to fund the town center reserve fund, the idea is we'll build up some money that can help reduce what we have to pay in the future. So skipping ahead, it's the same exact calculation as conservation reserve fund because it's the same funding, 1 cent on the tax rate. So that increase would go to $32 to $577 per $100,000 in home value. Then we also have the social service allocations. So prior to fiscal year 25, charitable appropriation requests would come to the select board. The select board would then add them to the budget in a charitable appropriation section of the budget, and they were not voted on separately. Well, informed by case law and statute, the attorneys advised that the town should actually be voting on those separately for each true charitable appropriation. So those are now all on the Australian ballot. We have, I think, 9 of them. So social services are defined as programs that include but are not limited to transportation, nutrition, childcare, medical care, other rehabilitative services for persons with low incomes, senior citizens, children, disabled persons, persons with a substance use disorder, and persons requiring employment to eliminate their need for public assistance. So we do get some requests that don't directly fit the statutory definition of social service, and those have been included in the budget in a category that they can be included in. So for instance, there's a request from the Kemmel Stump Little League that is in the budget under recreation, knowing that some of that money will end up going back to, to improve the fields in Volunteers Green that can be used by anybody in town. Okay. So there's 9 allocations on social services, including on the warning and Australian ballot. Again, they're not included in the budget. If they all pass as warned, it will add $21,760 to the budget which is an increase of $2.70 per $100,000 of property value. So if the budget passes as presented, the conservation fund passes, the town center fund passes, and all social services pass, it would be an 8.15% tax increase over FY '26. And as you recall, we're sitting at 3.98% with just the budget. So this is about 4 points higher than the budget. So this is a look at what the tax rate would be for the municipal side if everything on the ballot passed and the budget passes. $100,000 in value goes from $545 to $589. $500,000 in value goes from $27.24 to $29.46. And that is the end of the presentation, and we'll pause for questions.
Okay, guys, one at a time, one at a time.
I have one suggestion. The reserve funds seem really self-explanatory with the possible exception of the records restoration. And maybe just briefly describe what that is.
So let me go back to where those are.
That was initially started with a grant, right?
Yeah, I think it is still funded. Suzanne, have you come up to speed on that one yet? Too much, or maybe not? It really has to do with the records and the land records and making sure that they can be digitized.
They get digitized, it helps buy the books that the land records are put into. It could help do things like if the vault door fails, it would help replace the vault door. Anything to do with that kind of record, like if we needed to do anything with the plat maps, if we needed to buy another mechanism to hold them because we're almost already running out of room. So now those funds would hold another rack for our plat maps, anything of that type.
And I think that is all grant funded too. We don't raise anything in the budget for taxes to go towards records restoration. Oh, I guess, Mary, you can't see.
Oh, that, no.
No, just because Caitlin would normally call on you, but
Mary,
I'll call.
go ahead.
Carry on. We're looking at increasing the ability to pay the the town center reserve fund. At the end of the year, before we lose it, I know it probably stays in there, but is there a possibility that we can sweep what's left in the conservation reserve fund into the town center reserve fund? Because this building qualifies long, narrow, short, tall, fat, skinny, north, south, east, west, for everything in the conservation fund. I'd rather we use that here because this is a necessary function. We have to have this building functioning, and I'd rather not see it set in the conservation reserve fund. Because I think this town building needs to tap that fund rather than outside forces. Thank you.
So my quick answer on that is I don't think that we could directly just sweep conservation money into town center. There's a policy on the conservation fund, but I think if there's a specific project at the town center that would
Oh, I'll
qualify for
find
that, then that could be submitted for consideration for funding on a conservation fee.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would throw in there, one of the sort of three main legs of that stool that seem to be driving the need for improvements to the town center is flood resilience. And that might be an area where site work related to flood resilience serves a necessary conservation function.
To that point, what you have.
Well, somebody's laughing.
Resiliency. I know that a great deal of information was developed when the folks were presenting the $10 million budget for the restoration of this building. So I would like to see that information tapped rather than hiring another outside source, because that information has been researched and it is available.
Yeah,
That's part of what they put together for the $10 million bond issue.
there was a standing committee. They did a lot of work. Having reviewed those materials, there were some areas where they were really swinging for the fences. where there might be more modest solutions that would get the
Yeah.
job done. We just said, because the voters spoke so definitively on that issue and rejecting the $10 million project, it makes sense from my perspective. I don't know how other select board members feel, to start attacking these problems in smaller bites with the money we have to hand. The library has needs, but this building, if we improved the windows, we could reduce our energy use. If we make the envelope better, maybe we don't have to spend so much on mechanical equipment. But the concern with the mechanical systems now is a lot of them are below the flood level.
Mhm.
And so, long term, that's something we'll need to deal with either thoughtfully or as an emergency response, so. Anyhow, I've got a keen interest in looking at what we know needs to be done and finding creative ways to start getting things done without necessarily asking the voters for a big bond vote.
Thank you.
Jean?
Oh, I think I found what I was looking for. So I'm actually on the town website and I was looking for the link to this presentation. And I wanted to take a look again at the page that showed what to expect for taxes. It was a combined town and school taxes, and I didn't grab the page number.
Yeah, I'll get that for you, Gene.
44.
Was it? Yeah, it's probably further down. There we go. 44. You're right.
Page
Yeah.
44. So
Yeah.
if I read that correctly, if my house is valued at $500,000, I'm going to have a tax bill of $9,739.
That is the combination of the town at 2,800 and the school at 6,900. Yes.
So my total tax bill will be just shy of $10,000.
That's the numbers. Yeah.
Holy shit. How the hell am I going to be able to live in this town? I'm a widow. I live on Social Security. I've been in this house since 1979, and I got to pay for upkeep. I got to pay to have somebody come and help me do the things that I can't do anymore. This is crazy. It's out of control. Anyhow, this is what I was looking for. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Jean.
it's interesting to contrast this total as shown on page 44. If you take back the school part of that out of it, it's clear that the double-digit inflation of the school budgets is driving this
Oh, yeah.
point.
And again, Gene, this board only has control over the municipal tax rate,
I
which
understand. I actually sent a letter to Governor Scott and I said, they really need to have a program in Vermont like New York State. When you're over 65 years old, you're exempt from having to pay school taxes. I paid for my kids to go to school. I paid for everybody else's kids to go to school until I retire. And I actually didn't retire. I was let go at 72 years old. I would have still been working if they hadn't let me go. But it's like, how can people afford to live? And then this whole thing with the pre-K, don't get me started on that. When my kids went to pre-K, I had to pay for it out of my pocket. The state didn't pay for it. That's nuts. Anyhow, my 2 cents. I'll shut up.
Thanks, Jean. Any other comments? Questions?
I have one, just the spreadsheet published on the website identifies the increase in health insurance costs as being 48% FY27 over FY26. But you stated, I think in your presentation, it was like under 2%.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm just wondering, am I looking at an older version of the budget, or is this, am I misinterpreting the
Which spreadsheet on the website? I'd have to find that
Town of Richmond FY27 budget expenses?
in the packet.
It's
Oh, I think I might know what's going on. Let me see here. Is
Yeah.
it under here,
14 pages of,
budget. Yeah, I think,
yeah, I'm hoping you're right and this is not.
yeah. No, I think I know where we're at here. So we're looking at this spreadsheet that's in the back of the actual budget.
Yeah.
Do you know what line you're on? Because there's a,
For a particular department.
yeah, for a particular department, there might be.
Okay, yeah, I see that. It's under planning and zoning. I stand correct.
Right.
Thank you.
So that goes by each department, which can vary based on, yeah, how many,
Well, I assume that's because we added another full-time employee or something.
I'll just point out that the choice of an employee, we have such a modest number of employees, a difference between somebody choosing a family coverage and doing opt-out is substantially different. So there's a
Yeah.
big swing on one employee's health insurance.
Well, that's okay. This in its context makes more sense to me.
yeah,
Thanks.
and in planning and zoning, it's actually goes down by about 50%. We had budgeted at 51,000 for FY 26, and we're budgeted at 25,000 for FY 27. And I think that's because, yeah, there was a change in employment, and the new employee is not taking health insurance while the previous one did. But yeah, to Bart's point, that could easily be 25 grand the other way. So, and in a smaller budget, that has a bigger impact, for sure. But yeah, overall, health insurance went up by 1%.
Which, given the broader climate, is a fantastic number. I want to believe that.
That's a win, yes. I'm sure next year will be strong one, will probably be up by 10 again, who knows?
Other comments or questions? All right, let's move on to the next agenda item here. So this is Article 7, shall the voters of the town of Richmond, as required under 24 VSA 4385, adopt the 2026 Richmond Town Plan?
So we have Virginia Clark to give us an overview of that.
Welcome back.
Chair. Hey, at least it's almost 11 o'clock AM this time.
Yes.
Rather than when we
better.
usually visit with you.
Yeah.
Take that as a win.
Okay, well, glad to be here. I'm Virginia Clark, Chair of the Planning Commission. And I will make a very short presentation. I'm hoping that people have been following along over the course of this year in the development of the plan. Every 8 years, the town has to publish a municipal town plan that has to abide by the statute. It has to abide by the requirements of the Regional Planning Commission, any new statutes that have been approved over the course of the year. We put on our cover our fabulous river that we love and is problematic, but is beautiful. And we thought that was suitable. It's on everybody's mind what this river chooses to do, and how we choose to deal with it. So we thought that this was a good image to start off with. So the town plan is an aspirational document. It doesn't have any direct regulatory force. It is looked at if policies are called into question. There's a review of the town plan to see if they're compatible with the plan. But a lot of it is aspirational, and it's what we have come to find out that the town of Richmond, the region, and the state would like to see for the future. So giving us some guidelines towards what we can do in the future. We have 11 categories of items that have to be covered. Everything from education, transportation, and how, if we're going through looking at the screen, yeah, there we have all the items that have to be addressed in some form. We thought at first, when we began this process, we formed, the Planning Commission is responsible for this document. We formed a steering committee to do the actual work. And we thought it was going to be fairly simple, that we were just going to quickly update the 2018 plan, which had received a lot of public input and work and so forth. But in fact, many things have changed since then. The climate is somewhat different. The anxieties of people are somewhat different. New state laws, new regional planning initiatives. So there was actually quite a lot of work that went into reformulating these 11 sections. The sections which have a text portion that talks about where we are now, it's kind of a current snapshot, what our challenges are, what our strengths are. That section, those 11 sections are followed by an implementation table, which takes all of the action items that we have formulated to try to reach the goals that we have set. And the implementation table has owners or primary parties. And what we will do with this after the plan is passed is to send it out to all the different primary parties, their selection of action items. And what will happen with these action items really depends on the situation, who champions some of these things. For instance, if you look at community development, number 1.3, form a task force to develop and implement additional strategies for food security and to promote the connection between food and farming. That will depend on people forming that committee. So townwide people coming to the select board saying, we want you to fund a task force or set up a task force. Doesn't have to be funded. It's going to be volunteer effort. And the select board either saying, yes, we want to do that, or no, what's your plan? You know, however well prepared these people are who wish to form this task force, this is something that came out of our outreach. That's when it will happen. So we understand that all of these actions, and there are many of them, all of them will not happen. They will depend on who wants them to happen, who is passionate about it, whether the select board thinks it's a good idea, and so forth. So it seems like there are a lot of action items. We know from the 2018 plan that about half of the action items were completed. Some of them show up again since they weren't completed. Others of them were completed and they have been retired. So that's the nature of the implementation table. It's just to give you a look at all of the things that people would like to see happen, and some of them will and some of them won't. Following the implementation table is a section that's called the appendix. This has a lot of additional information that will be of historical value. It will be a resource for people to look at. This has things like the history of Richmond. It has resources for public health information. Yep, there we go. If we go just down a little
Find the
bit.
page number and I'll hop over there. So it's at like page
Okay,
14.
so the appendix.
Yeah, I'm gonna go there.
Data and additional information. This talks about what we did for outreach. It talks about, well, it has a lot of resources in it. It has a lot of additional information, for instance, about the geology of Richmond. So it's, each entry has a number and you can see the entries in the table of contents, which was not true of the previous appendix, so that you can go to something specific. For instance, the history of Richmond, I would like to read about. This was created by the Historical Society. That will tell you about the history. If you want to know about the geology, if you want to know about the zoning changes that have happened, that the Planning Commission has done, for instance, you can look at entry 14 in the appendix. What transportation studies have we done in the last 8 years that are relevant to our efforts now? You can look at section 12, transportation studies. So a lot of additional information. It's about half of the whole document. The reason we did it this way is to make the first sections shorter and easier to read, focused on the basics, the goals and the actions, and then additional information goes in here. If there are any graphics, they go in here. There's a big energy section that is provided to us by the Regional Planning Commission that helps us to understand where we are in terms of energy uses, where we would like to go. So that is the structure of the plan. And let me know if anyone has any questions as we go along, because it's fairly fluid presentation here. So getting back to what we needed to do, one of the big things we needed to do was to put into the plan the new statutes that have been placed on us, requirements that have been placed on us by the legislature. A number of housing statutory requirements, some conservation statutory requirements, energy and climate change, which is still a problem, even though we've had to focus a lot now on dealing with the effects of climate change. There's still the question of how can we mitigate climate change? How can we help to not have so much climate change? Obviously, Vermont's share is tiny, but if everybody didn't do anything because their share was tiny, nothing would be done. So the attitude here is that everybody should do their share and do what they can to help control climate change, as well as to deal with the impact that we're seeing with the flooding and heat and so forth. So we start with an introduction that talks a little bit about the plan in general. It talks about the concept of what is the vision, what are the goals, what are the action items. That's the basic structure. So it's pretty easy to follow. We found, because there was so much legislative activity and also Regional Planning Commission activity, that we needed to talk a bit more about the fact that we can't just have a plan that deals with what the people of Richmond want. Obviously, that's a big component of it, but we're also part of a region. We're part of the state. The state and the region have been active in the municipal sphere. So we had to take into consideration the new statewide goals and visions, as well as our own. Many of them are the same. And many of our goals are in our outreach work that we did. The goals that Richmond citizens had are similar to what the goals have been over the last couple of plans that I've been involved with anyway. Everybody wants to have rural character. We now want to also have housing. We don't want things to cost too much. You know, the goals stay pretty much the same. We want to have community. We want to really have a community spirit, people who work together. So moving on, the vision that we adopted, 2018, the vision was to be the most livable small town in Vermont, which we weren't sure exactly what that meant. I guess we get some kind of idea. We changed that a little bit. If you go down a little bit further, we adopted this as our goal: to preserve Richmond's working and natural landscapes, village character, community spirit, while expanding opportunities, improving access, and strengthening resilience for all residents. So we hope that this included most people's goals for Richmond. We understand that the character of our village is prized and is looked upon favorably by our neighboring towns that don't really have downtowns to their village. So we'd like to keep that. The economic portion is difficult. we don't really have a complete understanding of where bricks and mortar retail goes in the next 8 years that this plan is active over. So that's been challenging to put a plan together for that. We can support our local businesses, obviously. Enhancing recreation activities while protecting natural resources. This has been there's a source of controversy there at times. And we did try to identify in each section where the controversies were. You know, what are the challenges? Strengthening infrastructure against climate impacts, community engagement. So anyway, then we go to the goals and actions. The next box just shows what these words mean. Vision, that's the desired outcome. The goals is an aim, and the actions are how we're going to get there. The owners or the primary parties are sometimes our elected officials, community groups, town staff, townwide residents.
Virginia, just in the light of time, maybe a couple more minutes here, and let's hit the high points, and we can direct folks to the detailed overviews of the plan too. But if there's anything we want to make sure that folks are aware of, so we can give some time for questions too, if there are any.
Okay. Are there any questions so far or comments or?
Very cool. When you say strengthening infrastructure, what exactly does that mean?
Strengthening infrastructure,
Yeah, does that mean running it along Cochrane Road or
putting
so that it's part of the infrastructure for town?
bigger culverts, that kind of thing. So adding sidewalks if we need sidewalks, adding crosswalks if we need crosswalks, that would be.
So it's all centered on the village? Primarily.
No, not necessarily. The
The-
culvert certainly is a big
the
one that's
culverts-
in the rural
Sure,
area.
the culverts have been engineered for a specific water flow. And I spoke to somebody who worked for the state previously related to these kinds of issues, and he said, oh, typically they're oversized for what is considered to be a flood event.
Hmm.
So that it's able to handle the capacity.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with one on Cochrane Road. Before you get to Cochrane's, a couple years ago at that dip, the folks in the town highway department were able to replace that culvert. Perfect timing. We were in a dry spell and then we had a deluge. So it was an oversized culvert, but it was perfectly sized. So the engineers decide what size culverts are
Mhm.
necessary, but they also oversize them. So
Yeah, well, they have found that they have needed to replace some of the ones that were not oversized enough. I guess you'd say like the ones on Hillby Road, you know, they oversized those even more because the
Okay.
floods are bigger, the floods are worse. So, you know, strengthening infrastructure would be, the water and sewer treatment plant, maybe, stormwater.
and sewer and roads.
So roads, that's generally infrastructure. Buildings, I mean, this building with the flooding question, with the basement, for instance, that would be with infrastructure.
Okay.
So
Right.
any of those
Thank you.
items. Okay,
Thanks,
so
Virginia.
are there any other questions, or is there anything that people would like to talk about in particular about this plan?
We're aware that Act 250 is undergoing a long overdue rework. How it impacts various cities and towns depends on this sort of the rural or urban character of the cities. Was that any of that information available to you while you were putting the plan together, or you know, are you aware of how that might impact the transition to new zoning regulations that would follow this?
So the Act 250 review was present the whole time that we were working on the plan. So, you know, we understand that Act 250 as an entity is its own entity. Act 250 is going to do what the legislature tells it to do as a program on its own. there are ways that it affects our planning and our zoning. For instance, the recent question about tier 1.
Right.
So the new Act 250, the old Act 250 affected the whole town of Richmond. So it's not like Act 250 is now affecting the town of Richmond. It has always affected it. But the way it affected it was the whole map was affected the same with the size of the project. If it was a certain size, a certain largeness of project, or affected a lot of area, then Act 250 would be involved. What they've done now is still most of the town is affected that way with Act 250, with one exception, which I can talk about in a minute. But the downtown areas where there's already housing, they have reduced the oversight of Act 250 in some cases. That's tier 1. In Richmond, we elected to have that. Your select board, you weren't on it, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Elected to have the tier 1B status. In Chittenden County, a third of the towns elected not to have tier 1B status. The Planning Commission actually recommended against it. The Housing Committee recommended for it. Regional Planning recommended for it. The Select Board adopted it. That's fine. For instance, Colchester and Essex have not opted in, so they don't want it. So that's the tier 1 situation that has affected us in our water and sewer area.
Are you ready? Do you want me to bring you a brush? No.
In our water and sewer area, you will not have oversight for so many projects, for some of the smaller projects. At the other end, the compromise that the legislature made apparently was that some areas of important natural resources, they were also following laws that were passed in protecting natural resources. That's the tier 3 areas, which have critical natural resources that will be applied to smaller projects than the ones that were always implicated with Act 250. So if in our maps, and it doesn't actually matter what our municipal map shows necessarily, if Act 250, if their map shows something in tier 3, then their new greater emphasized Act 250 rules will be in place. So that has to do with Act 250. They are going to make that decision. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what we say on our map. If that's in their tier 3 area, then they will say these projects, not only projects that have 10 acres or more, but projects over 1 acre or whatever it is. They haven't made the rules yet. So it's impossible to say exactly how it's going to affect us. But for most of Richmond, Act 250 will remain the way it has been. The one exception is this current controversy over what's called the road rule, which is saying that if you make a road that's 800 feet or more long, or combine driveways and other paved surfaces of 2,000 feet, then the tier 3 regulations will apply. That is right now what is probably one of the most controversial parts of Act 250. There's nothing exactly that we can do about that. That is going to be for the legislature to decide and the Act 250 board to decide. If that road rule goes into place, then there will be other areas of Richmond that are affected by Act 250. That also does not directly relate to our municipal plan. That will be the Act 250 board's decision and the legislature's decision. So it was a balancing act to try to allow more housing, but to continue to preserve the natural resources. The way the law was passed was a balance and a compromise. And some people liked it, some people don't like it, some people are wondering where it's going. the Vermont League of Cities and Town has asked that all the decisions be put off instead of taking place on a compressed timeline in 26, put off till 27, so that more about this could be studied. So that's where the controversy is, and that's how it affects us. Not really through our map, but through what the work.
Well, to the extent that we want to expand housing opportunities, that we probably need more connected users on our water and sewer plant. It's not all negative from my point of view.
Yeah,
I just wanted to understand to the degree to which
right.
you understood those issues in forming this document.
Yeah,
So,
They-
thank you. I think it's
they do.
more than
And,
adequately
you
explained.
know, we are attempting through the zoning regulations, speaking now from the planning commission's point of view, to be consistent with the state goal of having 85% of the new growth occur in already developed areas where there is existing infrastructure. So that's where there's water and sewer. That's where our tier 1B is. It's in the water and sewer district. It's much more efficient and cheaper from a tax point of view to develop where there's already infrastructure. You don't have to make new roads. You know, you're using your water and sewer facilities that needs money put into it in order to keep it upgraded for the people who use it. So, you know, we're hoping that that generates additional housing. The Planning Commission has added in liberalized accessory housing, duplexes, 3 and 4 unit housing buildings to be allowed, so that we're not preventing it. Obviously, we can't make it happen, but we can reduce the barriers. So, and this document, the plan suggests that that happen through our zoning.
Martha, I see you got your hand up for a question.
Thank you. My question or comment may not directly apply to this, but I think the town and I think we all should be concerned about this as you plan and add structures downtown. And this is what I have to say. As we try to mitigate climate change, I am concerned about the wasted gas and fumes produced by the traffic on Jericho Road. I'd like to see the school and the town work together to encourage families to use the buses. If you come out on Jericho Road from Brown's Court, for example, in the morning or in the evening, you cannot get out. The traffic backs up to the round church in the morning, and all that gas and all those fumes are polluting the air. And if there's something that can be done to get these parents to put those kids on the buses, it would be wonderful. And if you're going to expand the population downtown, that increases this issue.
Thanks, Martha. Yeah, and I know that the superintendent and school board are focused on trying to get ridership up on the buses as well. So we'll make sure that that note is passed on to them, that we heard that here too. I think just on that comment personally, I have found that the e-bikes really do well on the hilly sections of Vermont and increase some of the access to downtown for some of the folks that are, you know, close, but in a hilly way. So if anyone wants to talk about e-bikes, I am happy to talk more.
Caitlin, I just want to add something really quickly. Martha's right that is a problem. But I think something that's often lost is it's not necessarily something the parents have any control over. As a parent of 2 children who had to be driven to school every day because the bus didn't go to our house, I often received a lot of negative comments about causing the traffic jam. And I even got a lot of pressure from the school because it took me 45 minutes to drive 3 miles. And sometimes the kids were late. And on the days when I had to bring the science project in or the book report presentation, and I couldn't even find a parking space. There are a lot of residences in Richmond that aren't served by the bus route. When we bought our house on Kenyon Road, we didn't know that. I have seen the bus on Kenyon Road now, but I know there are a lot of other houses that aren't served by the buses, and the parents have to drive the children in, but speaking as one of those parents, we certainly weren't happy about it.
Yes.
Yeah, and one thing that is set up as a goal in the town plan is to look at the transportation system and to understand it. Speaking personally, like David, as the grandparent of children who live at the bottom end of Huntington, to ride the bus to the middle school takes about an hour and a half because they go up all the roads, Texas Hill Road, et cetera, which is a really long time to spend on the bus. So one idea that the Planning Commission had was to allow those people who drive in from far to stop outside of the village and have a shuttle, for instance, that would take the children up from the round church maybe, or, you know, the far farm area. Would just gather children and take them up to the school and come back and gather another load and take them up. So those parents would not have to drive twice through those intersections or clutter up the parking lot. Those kind of solutions, very difficult to implement. There are a lot of standing objections to them from various factions, but the town plan suggests all those ideas should be considered. You know, it's not just putting all the children on the bus. That's not necessarily going to be the way to solve the problem. Anyway, so it's in the town plan that we do something, that we study it, that we actually take it seriously and try to come up with more inventive solutions. So.
And I will pass on that this came up at this meeting to the superintendent's office just to make them aware, but also feel free to reach out directly too. I know they're open to feedback. Awesome. Any other questions, or Virginia, any other things to cover? I want to make sure we get to the other piece of the agenda.
Any other questions out there people would like to talk about?
The revised map made it back in and the one that you had is out?
Yes.
Thank you.
So the recent change, the only change made by the select board at their approval to put this on the town plan was to remove the future land use map that the steering committee and planning commission had presented, which added some natural resource areas to the rural conservation district on the map. This was felt to add too much conservation land, so we returned to the basic regional planning commission's new map as is, and the planning commission has written a report stating that this is consistent with the goals of the statute 4302, what we have to put into a municipal plan. It is consistent, which is not surprising since the Regional Planning Commission is also required by that same statute to be consistent. So going back to their map, it would be very hard for them to say this is not consistent with 4302. So we've taken some of the land out of conservation and put it into rural ag and forestry. And some of it goes back into rural general. These are the new designations that the regional map is required to use. So that's all taken care of. The old map is out. The older map is back in.
Thank you.
And that's the only change that happened there.
Great.
Yeah. I'd like to thank you and your co-creators for what is clearly an extraordinary effort. I mean, there's a lot of time and effort went into this plan. Wouldn't want to miss the opportunity to thank you for putting it together and to being responsive to our concerns.
I'll just say, I think that's a really good point. I had a long conversation recently about the predilection for humans to look for the negative and the problems in things versus state the positive and recognize the amount of work and positive stuff that has gone into the town plan. So yeah, thanks to you and all the other folks involved.
I can't even imagine how stressful it is to be that thread that tied all of this together. So thank you.
Well, we had, I have to say, a fabulous public committee, the steering committee, Jason Osterman, Andrew Powers, Chelsea Brooks, Ian Benders, myself, Adam Wood was liaison. They were exceptionally responsive, putting together a survey, analyzing to great extent the survey, taking all of that information in, reading the new statutes, doing the writing, several iterations of every section.
There was a lot of really,
Fabulous. They did a lot of work, extremely responsive. I have, a lot of admiration for them. They took it on as a one-time thing. So, you all come back week after week, but they just put themselves out there for this plan. And I think it shows it. It's a good plan. It's ties many things together.
they did a lot of outreach too, public outreach.
They did public outreach and they analyzed the public outreach, and consolidated it into buckets. So anyway, it was
Wonderful.
good. It was good.
Well, thank you,
Thank you.
Virginia. Thank you for your time and for coming to talk about it more. There's also, just for other folks to be aware, there's several other meetings that we've gone over the town plan in further detail that can be accessed from the town site, and lots of information out there. Very excited to have this on the vote for this year. So thanks, Virginia and team.
You're welcome. And to find the town plan, if you want to read it, if you're out there, if you go to the Planning Commission's webpage or the Town Plan Steering Committee's webpage, maybe even the Select Board webpage, I don't know. You will find links to the plan and to the maps, to everything that you want is right there. So,
Perfect. Thank
all
you.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Up next, we have, sorry if you can hear my kids in the background, review and discuss Article 8. Shall the voters of the town of Richmond approve the funding the Conservation Reserve Fund by adding 1 cent to the municipal tax rate in the fiscal year 2027?
I
Josh.
think we have Sam Pratt from the Conservation Commission here. Sam, are you planning to present on this one?
Yeah, is Judy there? Is she in the room?
No.
I don't
Okay,
see
well,
what-
I guess it's me then.
You want me to call up your PowerPoint, or are you going to share your screen?
I can share my screen. Let me just see if I can. Well, actually,
Whatever's easier for you. I can share if you want.
I think I can make this work. Let me just give it a shot and see what happens.
All right, we got you.
Can you see that? Okay. All right. Well, yeah, hey everybody. Sam Pratt here. I'm the newly minted chair of the Richmond Conservation Commission. And so, yeah, for this item, we've just got a review of the Richmond Conservation Reserve Fund, which is a fund that the town has, voted to approve for the last 20 years for conservation-related projects. And we've got a 20-year successful track record at protecting water and air quality, biodiversity, working farms and forests, outdoor recreation, historic resources, and education. And yeah, a couple things to note is having this money in reserve allows the town to move pretty quickly on time-sensitive funding opportunities. I'll get more into that later. And then, and yeah, especially, considering things like, we've talked about flood resiliency a little bit, and having sort of a floating fund for stuff like that. We can certainly do proactive projects, but we can also use it for, potentially reactive purposes, assuming it's in line with the Conservation Reserve Fund criteria. And it also brings in major support from outside funding. There are a lot of opportunities in the state and, sometimes nationally that we can qualify for funds, but usually you have a lot more success if you've got some of your own skin in the game. And so having a conservation reserve fund that we can use to contribute to these projects increases our chances of being able to get some of those funding sources. Let me see how can I advance this. Sorry, this is a bit small. Yeah, I think so there's this conservation, I'll just kind of blow by this reserve fund project list really quick. There's a separate document for this that I sent to Josh and should be in the packet. So this is just sort of as an overview of what the Conservation Reserve Fund is. Here's a list of the last few projects. I might be able to, if you want, blow up just the 2025 projects, or I can see them fine. I can just read them off. I don't know if there's a preference.
You can make them bigger.
Okay, yeah. Oh, can you zoom in, or do I need to?
You're sharing, so you need to zoom in, but if you can't, I could probably share and figure out a way.
Yeah, let me just stop real quick, and I'll just open up the separate document that has it,
Right.
because
Good idea.
uh,
A little easier than zooming in on a PowerPoint.
yeah, no kidding.
While Sam's working on this, Mary, you might remember this. How long have we been voting on this as a separate annual item? Do you remember?
I think about 5 years now. They used to vote it in at larger intervals, but it was found to be not supposed to. It had to be a yearly vote.
I thought that might be interesting history to people who weren't aware.
Yeah, I think it's right about 5 years. Thank you.
Okay, let me try again here. Sorry, it's kind of cut off at the page level, but can you see this? I can zoom in a little bit. This should be hopefully a little.
A little more zoom in would probably be good.
Whoops, that's too much. Sorry, I've got an old computer. It's on its last leg, so it's a little slow.
That's better.
Okay, great. So yeah, we've got a variety of projects that were that had applications approved through the Conservation Reserve Fund in 2025, and that included helping fund the Richmond Master Naturalist or Vermont Master Naturalist program that is focused on Richmond this time around. We've got some Richmond residents who are currently in the midst of that program, and typically that program has a history of really giving back to the community, where they spend some time learning about the natural landscape, and they're focused in Richmond itself. And then usually, I think it's required as a part of the program that there's a number of volunteer hours that end up getting donated, I guess, after the class finishes. And typically folks that get involved in that program end up being excited about giving back to the community. So it's, I would say it's money well spent. I know of at least one or maybe a couple members of the Richmond Conservation Commission were part of the Vermont Master Naturalist program before they joined RCC. We've used money for trees on Volunteers Green, which is great for flood resiliency and just improving wildlife habitat, and also just looks nicer. And we really want to preserve that space. And we've had issues with erosion, and we'd like to try to prevent that as much as possible. We've got some really nice ash trees in town that are at risk of dying due to the emerald ash borer, and so we've been treating those trees. The goal there is that essentially as the wave of ash borers comes through, these trees will survive, and then the ash borers won't be able to survive here once they've wiped out most of the ash trees, and then the remaining trees will hopefully be safe and potentially serve as a source for repopulation of that species. And also, they're really beautiful trees, and it'd be great to be able to hang on to them if possible. That's something that I think happens every 2 or 3 years. So last year was a year that we ended up needing to do those injections. And that was in partnership with Caitlin Littlefield, the tree warden. We had the Beacon Preserve parking area. The old parking area was in rough shape. I believe it had flooded a few times and was not in an ideal spot. So through Richmond Land Trust, they helped organize construction of a new parking lot, which should serve us better. And then we coordinated with them even on the timing of when it went in to protect some turtle egg-laying habitat by the river. There's also establishment of the Andrews River Shore Preserve, which was a 11-acre parcel in the silver maple ostrich fern floodplain forest, which is exceedingly rare in the state. It used to be pretty common along the entire Winooski, but Richmond has some of the only remaining areas in the state. And so it's really important to protect those. We also helped out with the Browns Court park trees and a few other amenities like park benches and a picnic table, I believe, for just improvements to the park. And then finally, we coordinated with Richmond Mountain Trails to help get them some trail maintenance equipment. And as part of that arrangement, we are going to be implementing best practices for mowing schedules and also cleaning of the equipment. Historically, what's happened in town is folks have just done it on a volunteer basis, and there's not really any hasn't been much control over like who's mowing and when. And there are a couple problems with that. One is you might choose to mow at a time where birds might be nesting or insects might be reproducing, and so there are certain windows where we want to kind of try to focus on when we should be doing responsible trail management. And then also there's always a risk of spreading invasive plant species because of seeds and fragments of plants when you're doing those types of clearing jobs. And so we're also working with them to make sure that when folks are doing the trail maintenance, that they are cleaning off the equipment and not using their equipment as a vector to spread those around the town. So those are projects that were funded through the Conservation Reserve Fund last year. I'll go back to the deck. Can you see this?
Yep.
Okay. Here is a little blurry, but this is just a map of various projects in town showing things that the Reserve Fund has been used on. And there are a number of ways that the Conservation Reserve Fund advances the town plan priorities, protecting priority natural areas in order to maintain the health and function of those areas and their ecosystem services, preserving healthy and resilient working lands and agricultural soils, maintaining Richmond's rural character and scenic beauty, utilizing best management practices for Richmond-owned publicly accessible natural and recreational areas, and utilizing the Conservation Reserve Fund to protect important natural resources and public access to them where appropriate. Historically, this is sort of showing the multiplier on why this is such a good idea and how, you can see here that over time, over the 20-year period, $620,000 of CRF funds have ended up generating over $2 million. So, for every $1 we spend, we're getting another basically $3.50. Here are some existing needs that could be used for, that CRF funds could be used for. We've got the town forest, which hopefully will be getting the management plan done in the next few months, which means that we'll probably be putting some trails in soon, which will require some funding. And there are plenty of opportunities there for other things like studies or wildlife monitoring and whatnot. So there's a lot of opportunities there. We've of course got the Winooski River and flooding in town. Thankfully none last year, but the 2 years prior. So there are opportunities both preventative and reactive for flood mitigation and restoration, I guess. And then trail repair, due to flood damage. We've got invasive species. There's the town center, which was mentioned earlier, just general climate resilience. And then Vermont's 30 by 30 legislation, which is aimed at conserving 30% of the landscape by 2030. This has had pretty consistent voter support. I think in one of the other slides, it shows like the last few years worth of votes and in the margins, but it's had pretty solid support. So thankfully, folks in town have continued to want to fund the Conservation Reserve Fund. I believe this is actually Article 8, sorry. But this is just the item on the ballot. And I'll point out that it's financed by 1 cent on the tax rate, which essentially means that for every it costs the taxpayer $10 for every $100,000 of assessed value. So, if the town has assessed your home at $500,000, then you would pay $50 a year for the Conservation Reserve Fund. I think that's the last slide. Oh, and in the reserve, I think we currently have $360,000. So a decent amount of money currently. We did fund a number of projects last year, but I think there are a lot of opportunities on a prior slide for just needs out there that we might be able to use CRF funds for. And we're always looking for more projects to fund. And so I think that there's, even though we have a decent amount, sometimes it's nice to have the fund swell a little bit because bigger projects can come up. We don't know if we'll have flooding. There might be an opportunity for major improvements to town space or land acquisition. And so I think it makes sense to continue to fund this. And I know earlier we had mentioned potentially sweeping funds into the town center reserve fund, but I think that because we already have a mechanism to consider CRF applications, we could essentially, rather than just sweep the money, just have an application and then allocate money that way. And then, that would go to the select board who ultimately approves all of these. I will note that RCC is simply an advisory body and we sort of vet the applications. And then the select board has the ultimate authority on approving those funds. This is just a map of conserved lands in Richmond. It's kind of flipped. Green is non-conserved. Yellow is conserved. Concerns about taxes. Towns with more conserved acreage typically have lower property taxes because conserved properties demand fewer municipal services. Here is a consumer price index versus the Conservation Reserve Fund, and just seeing how over time this was like the tax the reassessment value where it jumps up, and it's just sort of like catching us up to the consumer price index. And I think that's the last slide. Sorry, there's a little hurried in getting this slide this deck together for today. But yeah, that's the spiel. And any questions or thoughts on the Conservation Reserve Fund?
We do have a hand up, Mary.
Hi, Mary Gould. You had mentioned that the conservation funds could be used for land acquisition. I need to caution you that any land acquisition in excess of $20,000 must be put to a town vote. And then second, where you had the conserved areas, one of the things that is absent is the entire area that is condemned by the floodplain. That should be in the conserved area because by its nature, floodplain can't do nothing with it. So that your map up there showing the conserved land does not represent accurate information. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. I appreciate you pointing out that, you're absolutely right in that for any land acquisition over, I believe it's $20,000 does need to be put to a vote, and it can't just be approved by the select board. So, but historically, the Conservation Reserve Fund has been used as a funding source for land acquisition in town. So it can be used for those purposes. It just has to go to a town vote.
I was just going to do a follow-up to Mary's comment. This came up in some of the conversations, I think, about the town plan, how we define like conserved and the different terms. And so clearly, you're right, there's the formally conserved with easements, I guess, and then there's de facto conserved like floodplains. So the terms and then application operationally are sometimes difficult to get our arms around. That's just a comment.
I think it's also worth pointing out that conserved land that you can't necessarily develop on, you can still do conservation projects, for like stream bank restoration and resilience. I mean, we've lost. If you just walk along the trail along the town green, and you'll see entire sections that have fallen into the river, and we've lost some trees, and we obviously don't want to lose our green. And so it's pretty important for us to still focus on areas that might not be developable, but can be invested in, so that we keep our town land and don't continue to see that erode.
Great, thanks. Jean?
So the question I had is, if conserved lands typically pay less in taxes, I saw on the town plan map that they took out of my 12 acres. It looks like they've got about 2 acres for my house site, and the rest of my land is considered conserved. And so if that's the case, am I going to get a lower tax bill because of that?
I think that the way that works, I could get back to you separately, I guess, but I know that for some specific uses, it might be current use, but there are certain uses in ways that you can designate your land such that you have a different tax rate. I know there's one for forestry. I'm not entirely certain if there's a separate one for conservation, but I could dig into that.
Get back to me on that. I'd be curious to know, because I've got 12 acres here, and I probably maintain 1.5 acres, and the rest of that goes up the side of Robbins Mountain. That's totally unusable to me, but I'm paying taxes on it. And when I saw what my tax bill is going to be for 2026, I just about had a heart attack. So anything I can do to reduce my taxes would be a huge help.
Yeah, I hear you. I heard your comment earlier, and this isn't really conservation related, but it is worth pointing out that, there's a lot of folks do the homestead deduction, or, for tax filing, where that can potentially significantly reduce the amount of tax that you pay. I think it only applies to the education portion. But as we saw, I'm wrong. Okay. I know that it can reduce your tax bill considerably. For some folks, it's like, you might end up paying half as much. I think something like 70% of Vermonters end up getting some type of reduction in their tax bill through that program. So if you're not already leveraging that, then you should definitely look into it, because it will make a big impact on your taxes.
Yeah.
I just add, Sam, this is Bard. In the earlier conversation, I was here on my phone looking up Vermont property tax relief, and to the degree that state site is accurate and current, it described Vermont homestead property tax relief. So it's got to be a homestead. That's the first thing. Maximum household income of 115,000 for the household per year. And then there's sort of a scale that goes down. You get more credit for less income. And the data suggested that the maximum credit was $8,000, 5.6 school, 2.4 municipal. I'm not going to guarantee that those figures are accurate, but that's briefly what I found online today.
Great.
Thank you.
Great.
I appreciate the effort that goes into this. I think we all benefit from the sort of natural beauty that makes Richmond such a nice place to live. I'm curious about the 30 by 30 program. I've been trying independently to sort of gauge how close to meeting that goal we are. It seems, if you include Camel's Hump State Park, which is partially resident in Richmond, that we're there. But I wonder if you have a target, or if you understand where we need to go in order to meet that statute.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I could get those for you and try to have them for the next budget meeting that we have on the 23rd. And I think it's also worth pointing out that more rural areas may end up having a higher share than the 30%. You're not going to conserve 30% of Burlington or Essex or some other towns, and so I think it's a state goal. So we're generally trying to hit that number. I'm not sure exactly where we are, but I'll see if I can't get that number for you.
And maybe Virginia might
Yeah, so I just went to a meeting of the Vermont Conservation Plan, which is the Housing and Conservation Boards assigned. They have been assigned to meet the goals of Act 59, which is the 30 by 30. And according to them, the state of Vermont has conserved, according to this definition that is flexible, as Bart pointed out, 27% of the land area of Vermont is conserved. So that's a pretty good amount of 30%. So 3% remains. And they also pointed out that it will vary definitely community by community. For instance, in Bolton, about 50% of the land is conserved, but that's because it's the mountains. You know, you can't do anything with that land. It's conserved. It's there's no question about that. I know that the Richmond Land Trust has conserved about 16% of the land area in Richmond. So, you know, that's a good amount there.
Right.
And then the question then becomes how to define what is conserved. You know, is conserved things that already have a legal easement? The conservation plan is undecided about whether to consider current use, which is the ag and forestry, whether to consider that conserved or not. Because if it's under current use, you cannot build on it, so it's conserved in that way, but you can get out of current use. So you could opt to pay back the money, develop it when you get out of current use. So that's one thing that's currently being worked on by the conservation plan, is whether to consider that durable conservation or not. And every town, it's just up to every town to do what they can to preserve important natural features. And, you know, as was mentioned, there will be more. The big towns will not be able to conserve as much. Places like Bolton will conserve more. So you don't have to be exactly that, but that's kind of a general goal.
Well, 30% of Richmond would be some 6,000 acres. And we've got a couple of large projects that get us about halfway there, it seems. And then it just sort of, what is our plan? You know, how are we going to piece together the remaining half of that? And
Yeah, well,
what counts? So I agree.
it's been done.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be something that the community could do. You know, the Conservation Commission, the Planning Commission could work together on really trying to plan out where that's going to be. You know, what are the important natural features that need to be conserved? Well, Act 250 effort right now is concentrating on what's called habitat connectors, which are travel routes for species, significant natural communities, and headwaters. Those are the three things that they're concentrating on. So that would be a place for us to start. You know, we could look at those things. It requires a lot of work, a lot of on the ground work to identify those in any community. And there really hasn't been time yet for that to be done.
It speaks in support of this particular measure on town meeting day, that we can continue to invest in conservation if we're going to get to this goal, if that's a community-wide goal.
Yeah, and you know, conservation reserve fund money might be used for investigating some of these things. You know, it has been, rural character has been the top vote getter, so to speak, in the last few town plans. So if we actually want to look at what that consists of, then this is the kind of work that could be done, and this money could contribute to that.
Yeah, very cool. At some point, I'd like to, I'll show up at one of the conservation fund meetings. It was always fun when I was on there. I think in light of the giant amount of money that's there, I think a study needs to be done specifically to fully identify all conserved lands. That means part of the Camel something. That means all the river area. That means all the floodplain, as well as the conserved by deed, the legal conservation. Because as we discussed before, you cannot develop in the floodplain. So to me, that is conserved. So that should count towards our total. So I'm going to present at one of these upcoming conservation meetings to fund a study to fully identify all conserve land. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, we'd love to have you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Any other questions for Sam?
I have, and I'm sorry, this is kind of a squirrely question, literally and figuratively. You know, when I think back to trees, this is very narrow compared to some of the other conversations we've just had. In not distant past, there have been substantial changes to chestnut trees, elm trees, and butternut trees, and perhaps other species that were once widely spread. And I'm just wondering, beyond ash trees, if there are any other opportunities to protect or resurrect some of those species that are to a great degree decimated.
That is a great question. I mean, for right now, my understanding with ash is all we really have is the injections, which are quite expensive. So typically that's just used for sort of like legacy trees or, you know, trees that are around town that might be in a place that people are getting a lot of enjoyment out of. A couple other species worth noting are beech. There's been beech blight complex, which is it's a complex, so it's technically, I think, a scale insect combined with a fungus that ends up killing the trees. And there's also like a leaf blight that's now been identified in Vermont. So we're probably going to lose most, if not all, of our beech trees. I think something like it's like 0.1% of beech trees have been resistant or immune to the beech blight complex, but they're not also resistant to the leaf blight as far as we know. So I'm not sure what studies are being done on that, but that is an important species, especially for wildlife, because it's a mass species. So they produce beech nuts, which are, you know, eaten by turkey and deer and bear and are an important resource. Another one that I don't think we have an issue with yet, but we may, especially with the changing climate, is our hemlock trees. There's the woolly adelgid, which has been a real problem in other parts of the East Coast, and it's kind of moving its way up. And so I'm not entirely certain what all we can do about that, but I think that there are a lot of potential partnerships, especially with UVM. Recently, I've put in a decent amount of work coordinating with folks from UVM and from the Winooski Natural Resources Conservation District, as well as reaching out to other conservation commissions that are, you know, doing a lot of great work, like the Waitsfield Conservation Commission. And I think that there are some pretty major partnership opportunities for, you know, study and, you know, to hopefully partner, you know, with some of these folks. So we may be able to pursue some of that stuff. And as I mentioned, it could be that for some of these, we can, you know, basically just get some, you know, free work done just in partnering with UVM. Some of them might involve a little bit of buy-in from our part, but that's just another reason why having the Conservation Reserve Fund can be really huge, because it might be that if we invest, you know, $10,000 in a project that, you know, we end up getting 90,000 through a grant or something. So yeah, I think there are definitely things that we should be continuing to look into. I mean, we're not all, you know, scientists on the Conservation Commission, but we're certainly trying to coordinate with the folks who are staying on top of this stuff and trying to find partners, you know, for this kind of thing.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Sam. Any other questions?
Mary Hull.
I understand the American chestnut has been making a comeback, and I know that Don Toby was affiliated with the University of Vermont. He's a forester, and he said that the butternut virus has not been defeated, but they have had success in grafting the butternut scions onto the black walnut tree seedlings, because they have been resistant to the virus. And I'm aware of the hemlock being under attack, but I do think there is some activity that's happening in some of these areas. You know, so much was done to identify the critter that was attacking all the ash, and we were able to work to remove the ones that couldn't be saved and take care of the ones that can be saved. So kudos to that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mary. All right. Well, thank you, Sam, and thank you to the Conservation Committee for this information and putting forward the informed budget.
Yeah, no problem. I'll see you guys again on the 23rd.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. All right, next up we have review and discuss Article 9. Shall the voters of the town of Richmond approve funding the town center reserve fund by adding 1 cent to the municipal tax rate in the fiscal year 2027? Josh, you want to tee this up?
Sure. I think I'll start by sharing the summary of the town center fund from FY25. So this is how it's currently structured. You can see that we started off FY25 with the balance of $266,000. The income there is mostly from rents. So post office is largest at almost $100,000, MMCTV at about $15,000. We also recently added the library room rentals into this because this fund can also be used to make repairs at the library. So we put a total of $136,000 in income in FY25. Expenses, $25,000 went back to building maintenance, another $25,000 to building utilities, building insurance about $7,000, and then some maintenance work at the library of about $9,000. So in the last fiscal year, we had about $70,000 net gain in this fund to finish the year at $336,000. So the proposal on the on the ballot for this year is to add to these rents 1% of the tax, or 1 cent on the tax rate, which is about $80,000, give or take, based on the final grand list. That would be added to that $136,000 that we anticipate again in income in FY27. We did touch on it a little bit earlier, that part of the reasoning for doing this is to help fund some of the larger projects that we know are looming for the town center building.
Great. Questions, comments?
I think we talked about it earlier, but there are sort of 3 big projects that need attention. One is replacing the exterior windows, which has been an evergreen issue here in Richmond. The providing for flood resilience in terms of the building systems, and then just sort of general upkeep and repair that's been kind of deferred for a long time. I mean, we've got, ceiling tiles that should be replaced. We've got, rooms that are only partially painted. And I was gaining a sense from talking to people in the community that, perhaps rather than try to swing for a $10 million project, that we start identifying smaller individual projects could be used in an increment. And if the fund were adequately financed, we could start ticking these things off the list without necessarily going to a huge bond vote and increasing tax rates in that way. So I'm supportive of people who want to explore that and bring it to us. But I think, knowing that the town has already rejected the big plan, that we should look at a sort of a response to that by coming back with a sort of incremental plan that gets us where we want to go over time.
I think that's right on. Greg, we might also mention the 2 contractors that we've now engaged, sort of big picture and day-to-day.
Yeah, one of the things about doing the big project is the contractor overhead and profit portion of the budget grows larger. Having done a lot of work for the military, I would say that they have a form of contract that hires a construction manager to provide ongoing services. They call them indefinite quantity, indefinite delivery, or something like that. I can't remember anymore, but that we might engage someone to provide professional management of these individual projects. I'd like to know a little bit more about the capabilities of our newly hired building manager and the degree to which they might be able to fulfill that role. But at any rate, if we're gonna sort of come up with a capital plan and say in this fiscal year we're going to replace 12 windows or something like that, then we would need someone we could turn to manage that process. There's a wide open field right now on how to discuss it, but we have had people approach Bart and I about this. So I think at a future meeting we might want to flesh this out, but I think asking the voters to give them a small increment so that we can start taking care of business here before the building falls apart due to neglect. I'm not confident that we're out of the woods in terms of flooding. I expect we'll have another major flood sooner than later. And, we'd like our town center to be able to keep functioning through emergencies. That's a big one. And, I know the longer we forestall this, the more expensive it is going to get. We've been talking about this window thing since the first town center renovation back in the must have been the mid-80s. So.
The final thing I would say is for people who haven't seen it, there's a photo out here of this building after the 1927 flood showing how a part of the building was swept away.
Fortunately, none of the recent flooding has been that severe,
Yes.
that high. 27 flood was, I mean, that reached up to the Congregational Church.
Yeah, flood resilience. Flood resilience in this case could involve interior improvements like moving the mechanical systems to higher floors. And it also could involve some site-related improvements that might direct floodwaters or provide a sort of dike around the building kind of thing. Right? All of those are possibilities. There's reasonably large amount of money set aside for maintenance of this building. I think it might be worth saying, okay, let's start chipping away at it.
Nice. Any other questions or comments? Okay, moving on. The last piece here that we have is to review and discuss Articles 10 through 18, charitable appropriations voted by Australian ballot. Josh, I understand we have reached out to each to have representatives come and join us if they choose. Otherwise, we'll cover the description if you want to get us teed off there.
Yeah, we did hear back from one organization that said they were going to send a representative, but I don't see them on the Zoom. I don't think I see anybody that looks like it. Is anybody on Zoom a representative from one of these organizations? Okay, I didn't think so. So I've pulled up all the funding notes here for these organizations. We can kind of go through those. And if anybody knows more about them, last year we had a couple of board members that knew a decent amount about a couple of the organizations. Feel free to jump in. So let me get to that. I think these go in the order of the warning as well. Okay. Right, so we start off with Vermont Family Network, and it is, here. Sorry, I'm moving all my Zoom pieces around here. So $500 for Vermont Family Network. This is a copy of their request, which is in this meeting packet, as well as on the town website under the town meeting page for the website. So this is about 1% of the people that they serve are town residents. And their mission statement is stated as the mission of Vermont Family Network is to empower and support all Vermont children, youth, and families, especially those with disabilities or special health needs. We do this by giving a strong start, lifting family, advancing inclusive communities. Anybody have questions or more to share on Vermont Family Network?
I have had the pleasure of having a presentation from Vermont Family Network, and the work they're doing is really powerful. They do a lot of informational sessions to dig deeper into the work they do with each of the families. But in times of emergency, in working with kids and making sure that folks have resources that they need, this is an incredibly powerful and strong organization.
Okay, thank you. Our next one is Age Well. This is requesting $3,500. They serve about 1% of the people that they serve are town residents. Let's see, where's their mission statement? To provide and support guidance that inspires our community to embrace aging with confidence. Bard usually has a few things on Age Well, but he has left the room. Okay, we'll move on.
We can come back to that one when he gets back in
Sure.
if he wants to make an additional comment.
That's a good point. Okay, next is Vermont Center for Independent Living. Amount requested is $375. They serve less than 1% of the folks that they serve are town residents. There's their mission statement. Oh, it's an attached mission statement. Let's see. We can get to. That's a little bit larger than the other ones. Oh, here we go. Mission statement. Mission of Vermont Center for Independent Living is to empower Vermonters with disabilities, deaf Vermonters, and others to tear down the physical, communication, and attitudinal barriers that keep us from realizing our full human potential. A little bit more to read there too. Anything else on Vermont Center for Independent Living? Hearing none. Next is Community on Temporary Shelter, otherwise known as COTS. They have served 7 residents in the town of Richmond in the past year, which is about 0.3% of everybody that they serve. They're requesting $1,000, and their mission statement is to provide emergency shelter services and housing for people who are homeless or marginally housed in Vermont. COTS advocates long-term solutions to end homelessness. We believe in the values and dignity of every human life, that housing is fundamental human right, and that emergency shelter is not the solution to homelessness.
I'll just make a comment on this. I'm not entirely familiar with the organization, but I am familiar with the need here. And especially since there's been some federal cuts in budget, we find that there's people who are going to get medical services for periods of time and then are unable to pay their rent during that time due to the services they're in, or finding themselves, homeless for the first time, recovering from something, and the hospitals can't keep them. So I think more than ever, this is really important, and not in the traditional sense of how we might think about people coming into homelessness. So just to add that point there.
Okay.
I am familiar with them. As a member of the Richmond Congregational Church, I'll say that we routinely prepare meals to be served at the day station downtown. I have, under my own steam, done that as well independently. Probably a few $1,000s a year in meals for the folks served by COTS, and I'm always struck by the fact that it's not who you would think it is. It's demographically very broad and deep, many women, many elderly people, and at least as far as the day station, they're not allowed to show up intoxicated. So it's not necessarily drug addicts or it's a definite need. The community supports it strongly through other means, but this is a relatively modest ask of the townspeople, and would encourage voters to support this.
Now that you're saying this, I'm making connecting the dots. I do know exactly who they are. And I've actually done one of the sleep outs with them, and their work is really powerful. They also serve teens and younger folks who might find themselves without housing for any reason, and they help them get on their feet. So really powerful organization, I think. Worth the time and money.
Okay, thank you. Next is our Community Cares Camp with a request for $6,000. The percentage of people they serve who are town residents are 30% of their campers, and 50% of their staff are town residents. They had 19 campers and 16 staff this past year. Their mission is to provide summer food for Mount Mansfield Union High School or Union School District children, and provide a summer enrichment camp for children who would not otherwise be able to attend a summer camp. I don't know, Suzanne, I'll put you on the spot as former director. I didn't see anybody, no.
She's not on, then I'll speak.
Okay, no, I don't see
Okay.
Catherine.
Yeah. So it's still the same mission. One thing I will say is, one of the cost cutting measures that the MMUUSD has done is they're cutting busing this summer. So there is, so they cut costs by cutting busing. So now there's an access barrier for poor people to get to that have to work and whatnot to get to camp. So, yeah, they've paid some money, but they've also increased the barrier. But anyways, so I feel, even though I'm not a part of the organization anymore, I feel now more than ever, it's even more important to have this organization, be a part. And then UUSD is also in the past, have supported, some of our campers, that can't be successful, that have, some support during the school year, so that campers can be successful at camp. They've pulled that support, so they're not supporting campers anymore. So I don't know if most of the staff are teens, they're not trained adults. And the kids that need these supports really need some trained adults. Anyways, so hopefully the camp can absorb and hire those trained adults to help those kiddos. And also the district is also shortening their program from 4 weeks to 3 weeks. And they're just doing tutoring. And also an interesting model. My daughter is a teacher in the district, and she is not qualified to provide summer services. You have to have a certain certification now, a high level of, anyways, I just think it's more important than ever that kids have access to summer opportunities. And also in light of what's happening too with preschool, the increased cost to families that haven't had a chance to budget it going into the next school year. Most likely families will be paying for preschool that they did not anticipate having to pay for. So that's my 2 cents. I still feel very passionately about this program.
Suzanne, this is a homegrown program, isn't it? Isn't this a Richmond based?
Yeah, it serves the 5 towns that make up MMUUSD. But it heavily serves Bolton, Richmond, and Huntington. Because they do have like a wide, most of the Underhill and Jericho kids go to the Live Wires program in Jericho. And they also have camperships, and a lot of the churches in the north end also provide camperships to that Live Wires program, but they do also provide camperships to OCC also. So so Live Wires kind of sort of the people that can pay in the north end, which I don't want to say there's more money in the north end, but anyways, there is that resource in the north end. So we kind of cover that gap here in the south end for providing that camp opportunity.
I think it's noteworthy that 30% of the campers and 50% of the staff are local. It's significantly higher percentage than the other organizations we've talked about so far today.
And one success that I never know what's going to touch me, if it's going to be a family, a camper. This time it was a retired person. Oh my gosh, and hopefully I always tear up with these stories. This lady, she retired. She's from Huntington. Their family works at Camel's Hump. She just wanted a purpose. She said, "You don't have to pay me." She said she's been in this district for years and years and years. Her family's been in this district. Her kids went through this district. And she said, "I just need a purpose. I've retired and I love children. I love this community. And will you let me work for your camp this summer?" And I said, "Absolutely. And I will pay you. Your knowledge about this community is invaluable." And the other part of that is She worked in the food services and she was allowed to make decisions. And she's such an early bird. She goes, "Can I make homemade muffins?" I said, "Yes." She's like, "Can I make a homemade this and a homemade that?" And I said, "Yes, yes, and yes." That's what our campers need. She was thrilled that she had that carte blanche to make all these homemade things. Our campers loved this homemade, all these homemade goodies first thing in the morning. So it was like a win-win-win all the way around. Yeah. She was thrilled.
Okay.
That's wonderful.
So, there we go.
Thank you. And I think there's obviously the benefit to the kids here, but from another aspect of things, the benefit to the parents where sometimes there's no other options, and that means the difference between being able to keep your job or having to be childcare, have one person dedicated to the childcare in the house or figure out a different plan. And that can really have an impact on how people are able to maintain their jobs. So outside of the wonderful impact to the children, it also really helps our economy of the parents who can then more effectively work. And I will say, like, statistically, that usually affects women significantly in being able to have a job and be part of the workforce.
There's job training for teens, and it's also gap employment for people that work in the district during the school year that need to look for work during the summer, because paraeducators don't get paid in the summer, but teachers have the opportunity to get paid, but paras don't. So.
Great. Thanks, Suzanne. All right. Any other comments on this?
No.
Josh, do you want to go back? I don't know if there's another one, but at some point we should go back and let Bard speak to the one that you had mentioned.
I just mentioned that usually you have some things to talk about with Aidwell.
Just briefly, it's one of 5 area agencies on aging in Vermont. It's charged with doing a lot of things for a lot of people without a whole lot of money. From, managing Meals on Wheels to case management support, a lot of benefits counseling. So it's another sort of organization that hasn't gotten many federal increases over the years. So, being sort of eroded by inflation generally. And they've been around for a while. And with an aging population, of course, there's more demand for some of the things that they do. That's probably enough for today.
Thanks, Bart. So yeah, we've got 4 more. This will be Article 15, steps to end domestic violence. They are asking for $1,500. Serve a large amount of people. They served 8 individuals, 7 adults and 1 child in Richmond in the last year. About 0.2% of their overall number of people served, but probably impactful for those 8 people. Their mission statement is to assist in the transition to a safe, independent life for all those who have been affected physically, sexually, emotionally, or economically by domestic abuse, to promote a culture that fosters justice, equity, and safety. Okay. Next will be Article 16, funding for Turning Point Center of Chittenden County. Their request is for $5,000. Looks like they have affected 4 town residents, or about 0.3% of the total that they serve. Their mission statement is described as Turning Point Center of Chittenden County is an inclusive, compassionate community supporting those on multiple paths to recovery through peer-driven services in a safe, substance-free environment. Pause if anybody has more to add. Okay. Article 17 is for HopeWorks. Let's see, where's their Richmond numbers? Okay, so they've served 452 total people in the last year. They don't have numbers for Richmond specific. The amount requested is $1,885. Their mission statement is they are dedicated to ending all forms of sexual violence. We are committed to serving the Chittenden County community through the continued provision of our services and to being a leading voice in the state of Vermont for meaningful change in law and society. We provide crisis counseling and advocacy for those whose lives have been affected by sexual violence. Our education outreach strives to change attitudes and beliefs that perpetuate and condone the cycle of violence. We continually seek to expand our efforts to meet the needs of an increasingly diverse community and welcome to all agencies. Welcome all to our agency. Support for our mission is actively sought through fundraising, development, and the dedicated efforts of our volunteers. Any more on HopeWorks? And then we have Howard Center. And just as a clarification, we do work with Howard Center for the Community Outreach Program, which is funded directly in the budget. We have an agreement with Howard Center for that program, which supports the police and mental health in responses to mental health issues. This is an additional request from Howard Center to support their mission overall. Looks like they've served about 116 residents of Richmond in the past year. Their amount requested is $2,000. Their mission statement is helping people and communities thrive by promoting supports and services to address mental health, substance use, and developmental needs.
It's a significant participation rate.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know we also have a lot of town members who actually work here, and are certainly up against the federal funding issues as we all really are. But they've been certainly significantly impacted from an organization standpoint, and being able to provide services as well.
All right, and that is the end of the articles of charitable appropriation.
Great. Okay. So I think any other comments, questions on that segment? Okay, I think we just need a motion to adjourn then, right?
Caitlin, this is David, so moved.
Is Bard, I'll second David's motion.
Okay, all in favor?
Bard, aye.
Greg, aye.
David, I.
Caitlin, aye. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Take care.
Caitlin.
Thanks, guys. Bye.